Have you ever wondered why your favorite taco is costing you an arm and a leg these days? Or is your dream couch still in back order status for months now? Join us as we go behind the scenes of the global supply chain. Let us discuss and understand its complexity and learn from the industry leaders, professionals, and subject matter experts. Expect in-depth analysis and genuine conversations about the major issues affecting the supply chain today. Welcome to Supply Chain Demystified. Your host is none other than the distinguished supply chain expert, Dr. Nick Valles. Professor Valles is the Academic Director of USC Marshall Global Supply Chain Management and Founding Executive Director of USC Marshall Randall R. Kendrick Global Supply Chain Institute.
Welcome to Supply Chain Demystified podcast. I'm your host, Professor Nick Valles, and today we have a very interesting subject that we're going to touch on. And so not only demystify from the standpoint of supply chain, but understand in a broader scope the importance of cybersecurity, cyber threat, what it is actually, and how do you really put this in a relevance context of our personal and professional lives. And I'm so pleased and thrilled to welcome the guest who is not only the expert in a cybersecurity area, but he is a philanthropist and entrepreneur who has incredibly passionately engaged in advancing the education as well as supporting the generational startups in many ways. Let's welcome my dear friend, Aubrey Chernick. Aubrey, thank you very much. Thanks for being here and taking time to talk about it.
Of course.
So let's actually set the stage. I know often we hear this in the news or we read about it, that some company's data got breached and some hospital systems crack, or just recently I just heard that there is close to 100 plus million social security has been compromised.
Many more perhaps.
Perhaps even more.
Yeah.
So set the stage for us and for the audience as to what is all this conversation about cybersecurity and how operational definition. Please define that for us and set the stage.
Well, I think an important part, because you and I are consumers, and there's many consumers watching us now, so I thought I'd just spend a couple seconds contrasting the perspective of a consumer versus a corporation. So as consumers, there's three different perspectives. One is, I have a personal computer, and I'm concerned about people hacking into that and that type of cybersecurity. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about attacks against corporations. Now, why, as a consumer, am I concerned about that? Well, there's two different reasons why we as consumers should be concerned about that. One is service disruption. So for example, Netflix. I know one of your favorite shows is The House of Dragon. I know you're really down with that, but other people watching right now would say, House of Dragons is so dope, it's sick. And for those people, if they don't see the next series on Netflix, that's a big disaster. For other people, they're trying to travel and the planes get shut down. And in hospitals, do you know what diversion means? I didn't know what that word means. Oh. You're in a rural hospital, you're in an ambulance, which means it's bad already, and you're going to one hospital and they can't accommodate you because of some systems. They have to declare a diversion. That ambulance needs to be diverted to another rural hospital that could be 100 miles away.
100 miles away, absolutely.
That gets important, you know what I mean? So that's one context of how we personally, as consumers, could be impacted by corporate events. But then there's this other element that you related to, which is the data breach. And for consumers, there's two types of data they steal. If you're on Netflix or a bank, whatever, they'll steal a type of data, it's called PII, that has your credit card, social security. The bad guys value that at maybe $20 to $100 per record they could steal. But in the healthcare industry, they steal PHI, personal healthcare records. And the bad guys value that at $100 to $1,000. It's got your medical history, your image scans, all of this stuff. So it's really difficult, from a personal point of view. Now, beyond that, there's many corporate impacts that we can talk about. But I just wanted to set the stage of how we as consumers really are impacted by these corporate types of breaches.
So I think, is it fair to then, Aubrey, to sort of frame this as that our world, from the physical world, let's say we go back 50 years and beyond, we used to be a lot more physically connected.
Exactly. Or physically vulnerable.
Or physically vulnerable.
Right.
Right? And now we are much more digitally connected. And then, so vulnerability is shifted from physical to digital.
Big time. Exactly, yes.
So, and I know we have few different dimensions where we can get into this thing, but in your experience, I mean, you're a very successful entrepreneur, innovator. You always tend to think a decade, if not longer, on a horizon scan. Let's frame this to your very successful venture with IBM. You looked at the mainframe, which was the masterpiece of the time, that century, in that decade or two. Mainframe was the way to compute and enterprises to run their information systems. You found somehow the gap, you found the friction, and you converted that into the opportunity.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
It's interesting, Nick, because it might sound strange, I like being an industry outsider. So I didn't really know much about a mainframe. I was an average programmer, but then I realized there's a new generation of real-time mainframes. Before it was batch, real-time mainframes. And so I started a company to analyze what's going on inside this computer system. After a while, I said, how big is the computer system? So I realized if we printed out the source code and put it in a box and put the boxes on top of each other, the height of the boxes would be a 19-story building.
Wow.
I said, this is a lot of fun to try and figure out the analysis of what's going on. It's almost like a psychosis because these things are so complicated. So I wrote a real-time product that would analyze in real time the problems in the IBM mainframe computer. A lot of fun. Then the marketing was even more fun because no one knew me. I was a one-person company initially. But ultimately, I learned how to use different types of marketing, telemarketing. Ultimately, IBM started to buy our products. That sounds strange because when you have a $100 million computer, why would you go to a 1 or 10-person company to solve their problem? But that's what we did. And ultimately, I grew that business to a couple thousand people, a couple $100 million, and IBM bought my company. So in cybersecurity, it's an interesting parallel. You see, cybersecurity is bigger than a 19-story building. It's all over the place. And in cybersecurity, it's just not a complex system like the mainframe is. In cybersecurity, there's bad guys, they're called threat actors, that are adversaries. And if you fix a problem, they want to get around it because they're motivated and they're very creative. So the dynamics in this it's a lot of fun. Plus, there's many cultural issues in every industry and every company. So the byline that we talk about in my company is we try and help a company problem in spite of itself. We try and help an industry problem in spite of itself. That phrase, in spite of itself, means every industry has cultural, political, managerial silos, horizontally and vertically, that always causes friction in terms of solving any problem. So that's our higher order calling. We love the technology, but the technology solutions we have is not sufficient at all. We have to solve these other bigger problems that I really like.
So is it? Let's talk about that. Then I think that sort of a very strong DNA that you have of being able to find the problem space and create the opportunity within that, which was a very successful venture that you just talked about. Ultimately, IBM bought your company. Your latest adventure, Celerium,
Yes.
which is to now within the cybersecurity space. Exactly. Let's talk about Celerium and what is the vision and why are you so passionate?
The vision has evolved, of course, and so I bought a few years ago a company in the what's called network defense space. They had done business with DoD for their defense industrial base for about 4 years. And I saw in this product the potential to take it further beyond generic, what's called network defense, into something called data breach. So right now, our focus as a company is on data breach defense, which is the combination of data breach detection and data breach response. So that's our focus as a company. And within that, the industry that we're focusing on very narrowly right now is our hospitals, not healthcare, but hospitals. Because hospitals sometimes get inundated with maybe 1 to 2 data breaches per day across there's 5,000 or 6,000 hospitals. 1 to 2 a day are being impacted. Some of these might have life and safety impacts. It's very complicated. It gets worse because the federal government in 2022, Congress, mandated that HHS create a report, people call it the wall of shame, where hospitals are mandated to report within about 60 days any material data breach over 500 records or something like that. And so there's a public listing of them. So the impacts on corporations, there's the reputation impact. They could have regulatory fines. They might have class action lawsuits for maybe $100 million or more. Anthem, I think, Health had that. There can be testimony in class action lawsuits. There can be testimony in terms of Congress, et cetera. It gets really, really problematic at the corporate level. So it's a really fascinating space.
So basically there is a lot of regulatory pressure along with the risk and exposure of patients' confidentiality. So this is a big...
But also criminal lawsuits. Outside of healthcare, for example, T-Mobile, they don't have healthcare data, but I think they had to settle with a class action lawsuit that cost them $500 million. Wow. That adds up after a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention the breach of trust, because the consumers feel that you have not done the due diligence.
That's
and
a big issue.
So why should I trust your product if I don't have the faith? So, that brings me, and I think you touched on something that, I've often written about it and I often talk about these things, is the geopolitical, right? The adversarial entities. They've figured it out that I don't need to fight costly war. I don't need to fire missiles and bombs or create any, but I can actually very simply create a huge impact, if not even significant impact. By
drones instead of F-35s.
F-35s. We see that in the current conflict, that we're seeing that deployment of the drone or attacking the utility systems by simply just bringing it down. And I can go, we can talk about multiple examples. So these bad actors are what I feel, they're not only capable, but they're resourceful. They're getting funding from dark channels, if you will. How do you view that?
In some countries, the state government might directly work with threat actors as an agent of the state government to attack or destabilize different countries, to mess things up in Western countries, the US, et cetera. That's part of it. In other countries, the perpetrators, they're called threat actors sometimes, they're a little bit looser from the government, maybe in Russia, and there's a lot of criminal threat actors that are going after money and criminal operations. They might have hundreds of people that are targeting one bank or one group. Some of the banks, Nick, I don't know if you know this, as it reported several years ago, the JP Morgan budget for cybersecurity used to be $200 million, $400 million. Now it's $1 billion per year for cyber. Same thing with other major banks. So there's a lot of geopolitical risk. And the rate at which these threat actors are becoming innovative is really astounding. I'm not sure if that's something you wanted me to go into.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Again, just back as consumers, for example, a few years ago, 10 years ago, some of us might have gotten an email from Nigeria. And say, listen, I want to give you $10 million.
I'm a prince of Nigeria.
A prince, I want to give you $10 million, but I just need $1,500 from you right now. For some of us, we thought, maybe that's suspicious. Not all of us. That line where our judgment, our gut could say that's suspicious, that's getting worse and worse, more difficult. And it's theorized that over the next year, maybe 6 months or so, these phishing attacks are going to be so stealth that there's not going to be any intuition in our stomach that's ringing before our brain gets it. It's ringing. This may not feel right. Very difficult to understand these things. I get a lot of things. Dropbox, verified Dropbox. Even about my own, most of them are BS. How do you find out? You just click on the Dropbox email and return. And if you see that this thing is coming from giddy.com or blah blah.com, whatever, well, this isn't legitimate. So we have to evolve our radar, our vigilant radar, more than we did before, at a higher rate, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that this gets to the point that I spoke about, that the more we get digitally connected and intertwined and entangled, the more data and more informations and more cloud. We're just becoming more prone, potentially, to these cyber attacks, because there are too many doors and windows for the bad actors to penetrate through.
I think you touched on two important points. One is the interconnectedness, and one is what's called the attack surface, many ways to get in. So in the interconnectedness, I don't need to tell you, this is the essence of the supply chain industry. With all these interconnectedness, and the medical industry is getting more and more interconnected with data, et cetera, there's more fragility because it's brittle, because many of these connections are what's called tightly coupled. And if one thing breaks, the industries typically have not been engineered for responsiveness, resiliency. I know I use that word a lot too. So that is a big issue. For example, in the healthcare industry, a few months ago, there's an organization called Change Healthcare. It had some cybersecurity problems, but because it was so interdependent with many, many other hospitals, pharmacies, groups, it was said that that one attack may have affected 1/3 of the people in the United States. So the other issue that you talked about, though, is all these different systems mean there's more ways to get into companies. That is true. You can get in through mobile, through social media, all these different ways. And the concept of preventing, it's nice to have this dream of preventing systems through some type of wall. That is a bygone dream. It's still there, prevention, network prevention, firewalls, but even DoD said last November, they assume the bad guys are already in their system. There's something new called zero-day trust where they're trying to prevent it. The assumption now is you cannot prevent the bad guys from getting into your corporate system. They're there now. IBM says the detection time is maybe 200 days for an average company to even detect the bad guys are there.
Oh my God.
I'm telling you, I know. That's what based on 7 years of research. In Medicare, medical hospitals, they might say it's a little bit longer. But just to detect the bad guys are in your system is very difficult. I hope I'm not giving you a hard time.
No. But I bet that you bring up a very good question, both personal and professional, or enterprise, and we individually needs to evaluate that how do you not only keep up your radars to look for these things, but how one has to now be very cautious about trusting the source and not transacting in the first instinct.
It's very difficult, very difficult.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we heard this 12th annual Global Supply Chain Summit that we're hosting and where we're doing our podcast from. The theme is AI.
Yes.
AI in everything, right? How does, in a context of cybersecurity, the AI conversation fits in?
Yes.
Can the bad guy, let's start with the bad guy first, and bad actors, utilize the same technology that can improve the human experiences and performance, can use that to gain smarter ways to get into the systems?
It's an essential question. Frankly, no one can do a podcast about any topic today without bringing up AI. So what was the question? Oh, I know the question. The bad guys, okay. So the bad guys can exploit AI in many different ways. First of all, I should say, what's unbelievable about the bad guys is it's no longer a single threat actor that's trying to get in your system. There's an ecosystem of threat actors. There's certainly a marketplace in the dark web to buy certain toolkits, but the threat actors sometimes team up with each other. Like if you want to build a building, you have all these different subs that work together. That's the way it is. So sometimes threat actors use toolkits from other threat actors. It's called ransomware as a service in part. But more specifically to the issue of AI, there's a couple ways it can be used. One, AI to automatically generate these phishing emails that no longer have spelling mistakes and no longer have the sketchiness of the Nigerian prince. Okay. Now they're getting, how deep fake.
Yeah.
Think about deep fake phishing attacks by AI. Getting smoother, so your stomach, your intuition is not popping up, this doesn't feel quite right, before your mind. Forget about that. That's going to disappear. Secondly, before, in the profession of threat actors, you get some in foreign countries that are really, really experienced, hundreds of millions of dollars, supporting them. But then you have young threat actors that aren't experienced. They no longer have to have the experience the older guys did, because they can leverage AI to do some of these attacks without them being smart. What the impact means all of us can be attacked much more than we could because all the junior threat actors can go over us because they're powered with AI.
Oh, that's incredible. And I think it actually supplements or actually strengthens what used to be the weakness. Now it converts into the strength, and you can differentiate.
I know. So another element about AI beyond these phishing attacks, where again, you no longer know that it's coming from Nigeria, the prince, et cetera. Another stealth thing they do is they create automated malware routines. It's deeper than phishing. It's where they automatically can insert malware in your system. And some of this can get really, really crafty. So for example, I'm not sure if you know, Nick, but when you have a computer, and you have these hard drives, I don't know if you know, but the hard drives themselves have some software code in it. It's called a BIOS. So they have a little operating system there. Do you know that some of the threat actors try to intercept a computer as it's being physically delivered through the supply chain? And they will go in there, maybe it's a laptop, maybe it's a desktop, and they will intercept that computer and physically replace the hard drive. And what they will sometimes do is on that hard drive, either physically or electronically, they will replace or penetrate the operating system. The operating system is called a BIOS. And they will insert that in there. In other words, when you're trying to detect, as I said, the problem with detection, what's going on at the operating system level where you have all your programs and diagnostic things, they do not have visibility to the operating system and the hard drive because it's kind of subterranean.
So it stays dormant, and then they can wake it up and wake.
Well, it actually can be active. They can be looking at data, sending out data, but you can't find, because normally when you're doing searches for malware and all these other things, they don't search all these drives. It's very, very stealth, very advanced. So AI can be used on the human touch side where they have these phishing attacks. And obviously they can be used to generate malware campaigns. And as I said, as we were talking before, the bigger issue in the industry is before you needed really expert hackers, threat actors to get in your system. Now you can have junior hackers or threat actors because they can use these other techniques of libraries of AI stuff, so they can be almost as expert as the big guys. And that means that society as a whole can be even more inundated by these gruesome AI attacks than it might have been in previous years.
Fascinating. So I think this cyber security and the threats and this whole space of now data breach to all the things we spoke about is a lot more complex. And I believe it will continue to get complex because we are ingesting so much data. We're creating such a large repository. And so how can company proactively stay ahead of this curve?
It's a big problem. The bad guys are getting more sophisticated, as we talked about, more tools, more innovation. And sadly, the corporations are becoming vulnerable. As I mentioned, some of the large banks are spending only $1 billion a year. But for most companies, they don't have enough IT staff, computer people, or cybersecurity. Their staff is overloaded and their staff is overwhelmed. It's said that there's about 3 to 3.5 million job openings for cybersecurity people. This has only been going on 5 or 10 years. So if you're a paltry, $100 million company or $500 million company, it's not that you can't afford to hire the cybersecurity people. Why would they want to work for some low-life company that's only a $100 million company? I mean, how do you even money alone cannot necessarily attract them. So the issues get even worse, not because the bad guys attacking, as you said, everything, and the problem's getting worse. There's just less and less. So what that means is you need to have more automation. There's just not enough people. You need more automation to detect things and respond to things, which is, of course, what we're trying to work on.
So if we look at it in sort of a totality, the cybersecurity, let's look at from the corporation standpoint. This not only has a huge issues of loss of productivity, loss of revenue, potential impact on business shutdown, but also legal liability, potentially even loss of reputation. So this thing can actually, if they're not only proactive, but not investing right resources, this can have a magnitude of effect and impact.
Let me just mention the legal liability. 2 different elements. One is, they're both very awkward. One is personal liability. So I mentioned there's this healthcare company, Change Healthcare, that impacted through cybersecurity, data breaches, but other cybersecurity attacks, potentially 1/3 of the people. They had hearings in Congress with the CEO. But even more importantly, one of the members of Congress, Ron Wyden, I think around end of March, wrote a letter to the SEC, Security Exchange Commission, where they're trying to protect investors, and the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, where they're trying to protect consumers. And in his letter, he stated that he believed that the board of directors and the CEO of Change Healthcare were negligent. That's a pretty direct person. Why? Because he felt that they did not hire the right cybersecurity executive or CISO. That gets pretty direct. It goes beyond finance. It's very personal.
That holds you liable for any punitive damages.
Well, it could, exactly. So I'm not sure where that's going. He wrote that letter, but that's very, very personal when they say the CEO of the board could be, negligent.
This is truly, so I've meant to share the story because you mentioned about the bad actor imitating the using of AI. This was about 3 months ago. I received a text message and an email simultaneously from one of my friend, who is a faculty colleague of mine, that he's stuck outside airport and needs cash. And
red flag.
And it looked legit because that was his email, because I double-clicked the email like you had suggested. I do that often. And then the text message. So I text him back and I said, hey, is this you? And so then the message comes back over text saying, I can't answer the message. Please just follow my instruction. So that looked suspicious.
Yes.
They wanted $2,500 wired.
There you go.
For him to be helped. And I'm like, that is unusual request. Anyway, long story short, I happen to have his wife's cell phone number.
Yes.
So fortunately, I texted her asking, is Jeff okay?
Yes.
And she's like, oh, yeah, we're fine. We're having coffee.
Yeah, he's not.
I was like, he's not at the airport. And then I shared with it, and he said it was spam. His entire computer was locked up.
Yeah.
And the bad actors had accessed his personal data.
Yes.
And so, one of the things, Aubrey, concerns me, in a time of this, you don't know where legit
That's it.
or
that is it.
This attack is genuine, and how do you prevent and protect?
Exactly.
Right? And I'm sure there's many experiences, even the audience, as you evaluate the subject of cybersecurity, even in your personal domain, at home, or your kids, or your family, or partners. I mean, you can look at it, how vulnerable we are. Just imagine how many devices you today have that are connected within your network that you have access to, that somebody else also could have access.
We need to tune up our radar even more. Can I tell you another story that's a little bit even more gut-wrenching? So these bad guys, threat actors, were trying to get into a certain corporation and maybe target the chief operating officer, not necessarily CEO, because he had the keys to computers, whatever, and they couldn't get in. But anyway, they found out by following him in the news that his son had an accident on a motorcycle, I think, and was in a hospital someplace in Europe. They found out the name of the hospital. So they contact him, probably just with an email, to say, oh, we need to talk to you about your son's condition at this hospital. And they faked that they were coming from the hospital. In that situation, that's what's called a spear phishing. They're directly targeting it with deep knowledge of the context of what's going on. And a normal person would say, whoa, this has got to be legit. And maybe my, filters aren't so high right now. And so he responded and clicked on something, and that's how they got in. And that was 5 years ago. They can be very nefarious in understanding critical things going on in your life right now that make you more vulnerable to bring down your guards, vigilance, and get in your system.
Amazing. So these are in a way, scary situations. So, a lot of my followers and listeners, they are either in the process of in a mid to senior level management position. What advice, Aubrey, that you would give them for them to better prepare sort of a knowledge base and the wisdom So
Sure.
to sort of not only the technical expertise, but also the wisdom from your side that you would provide them so they should really harness.
There's lots of generic managerial advice. Here's a strategy, here's blah, 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 that they can read online. But just to narrow this a little bit more in the context of data breaches, the big issue, Nick, is how do you bridge the gap between management and executive leadership and the IT staff? So in this context, I would say a couple things. Have they articulated, maybe with their IT team, a time in which they want to detect a data breach? Okay? Because if that's not defined, well, maybe the IT staff thinks, well, we can detect it in a few days, a few weeks. Have the executives set a goal that we want it detected in 1 month? Well, maybe we can't do 1 month right now. Maybe we need to have a maturity curve that over the next couple of years, we're going to detect it in 3 months, then 2 months, and 1 month, and 1 week. But they should set some goal. And that then starts to create a connection between executive issues or responsibility and the IT staff. So for example, if you were that executive and you're called to testify in a class action lawsuit or in Congress, what did you do? Well, did you use the best? We use these tools. What else did you do? Did you tell your staff that they need to focus on data breaches? Well, they're professionals, but no, that's not the issue. They may be professionals, but did you executive leadership?
Expectation.
No, you didn't. So that is one issue. You can talk to them about response times and other things. So primarily, I'd say it's not the conceptual bridge because, executive oversight can be a little bit wishy-washy. There's terminology like an IR plan. You have a consultant come in, they look at your incident response plan, it becomes a book, it's dusty, whatever. And then here's another very, very interesting issue. You're going to love this. When large companies, they create an incident response plan that says, in theory, when something happens, what do we do? Here's the playbook, blah, 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 blah. But it gets dusty. And it becomes obsolete probably after a few days. Why? Because the attack surface, the hardware, software is changing all the time. When the incident occurs, in theory, you're supposed to follow the playbook. Who's supposed to follow the playbook? Well, it's your IT organization. So another issue for executives, this is a very awkward thing I'm going to say. When there's a problem, I don't mean the planning stage. When there's a problem and it's 24 hours later, who's going to run the show? Who's going to determine? So you have to decide what systems are you going to take down or not. That's not easy. The cyber people you see need to take this down because we're going to get impacted more. There's encryption. If you take it down, you're going to cause disruption to the business, to customers, and maybe to patients. This issue of what systems you're going to take down, here are the 3 or 4 questions. Number 1, are you going to abdicate to the IT organization to make those decisions? Are you going to delegate it? Or thirdly, are you going to say, okay, IT, you make the decisions with input from the executives? Or are you going to invert that to say, no, when it comes to critical systems, I, not as necessarily CEO, but COO or different business leaders in different departments, they are going to make decisions with the input of IT. Yep. This is a major, major reset because in many organizations, they delegate or default to the IT people. And I've heard stories where sometimes the IT people try and get the business executives involved. And sometimes the business executives are so confused, I think the word is flummoxed, that sometimes they've spent 3 days in indecision because it is a very, very difficult decision. So this issue, again, when you're being cross-examined, you're in a court of law, what have you done? Are you delegating this to the IT people? Do you have any executive leadership role? Operationally, not up here in terms of executive governance. Operationally, is anyone leading this? Or are you delegating it to your IT people or even to your outside IR consultant? Very gritty questions, awkward questions.
And I think this, if you are subjected to this kind of a threat or data breach, the latency is the last thing you want. I mean, you want the speedy decisions. You want expedited ways to come to the resolution.
Yes.
So let me ask you this question. It just came to me that one of the company executive who was visiting me from Mexico, who has a 3PL operation, a large asset-based company, the system was hijacked. So they apparently locked the system for the TMS.
Yeah.
And I don't know what category would you
call it? It's a type of ransomware. It's called encryption or whatever. They lock it down. Yeah, I know.
And then they wanted, if I'm not mistaken, like 15 million in Bitcoin
Absolute
in a
extortion.
Bitcoin. So is this? I mean, that's only incident that just came to me as we were talking about these things. Is this common?
It's worse. In the case of Change Healthcare, according to industry reports, the ransomware they wanted was $22 million, but that's not the whole thing. Remember how I said a few minutes ago that there's been an evolution in the threat actor ecosystem? Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily acting alone, they're acting in partnership. There's this phrase, sometimes there's no honor among thieves. According to industry reports, after Change Healthcare paid the $22 million to one guy, the other guys, their partners, nefarious partners, said, well, we want some money too. Well, wait a minute, we gave you the $20 million, you just should have shared it with someone else. I mean, this is getting, more and more problematic.
Yeah. Oh, that is scary.
I know.
That is scary. So I know the Celerium, your venture today, focuses on this thing. So how does vendor, supplier, if they're interested about Celerium, I mean, what value proposition?
So I can tell you right now what we're working on for the hospital marketplace. Now, what I'm going to tell you has not been publicly announced yet. So this is a little bit early.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what we're working on. So we're working on a pilot program for 2025. We're going to provide a free pilot to maybe 300 hospitals to do two things. We want to figure out how we can help them out individually with data breach defense. What that means is, can we help them out to provide earlier data breach detection and data breach response individually? So again, what that means is literally if you're at your home and you have an intruder trying to break in, you want to have an alarm system say, oh, someone's broken in through the window. And maybe you have Ring or you have someone's coming in through the door. That's intrusion. So that's one thing we're going to do. That's very important because, again, the multi-month detection time. Mm-hmm. So that's one focus. But we're working on something bigger than that we call an early warning system. What would that mean? So your home is in a neighborhood and on a street. Now, if you heard about one break-in a few doors from you, that's only one episodic thing. It's not a trend. But if you learned along your street or your neighborhood that over the last 3 weeks, there's been two, and over the last 2 weeks, there's been a couple more. In other words, there's a trend, that's different than one data point, obviously, et cetera. One does not affect you, but if there's a trend, that means you should be more vigilant. So this issue of having data breach detection, that's when the bad guys are in your home, they're in your system, they're stealing data. But what about even before that? So what we're going to try and create is a data breach early warning system among our hospital participants, maybe a few hundred hospitals, so that we can detect in advance trends that might impact your hospital before that's even occurred. And if possible, then not only to warn you through an alert, but actually to connect this to defensive systems. So ideally, these systems might defend you from future attacks and protect you as opposed to waiting, for the data breach. If this is possible, that means that maybe you might avoid some of the disclosures that HHS has. It might reduce your vulnerability to reputational damage. It might reduce your possibility, Nick, that you might have to testify in a class action lawsuit, or better yet, in Congress. Timing is really an important issue, not only to respond quickly, but maybe to be ahead of the game even before it's happening.
So it'll be some sort of a signal system. So it's a green, you're likely turning yellow or red.
Yes.
And so you probably give that kind of a warning system alert.
So that's the humanistic notion, right? Different colors of alerts. But then the later stage is to potentially take that data directly, plug it into defensive systems so that you're not waiting for a person to look at these different lights, to have that system automatically putting up extra measures of defense in anticipation of these attacks.
So will this be the alert system not only forewarn you, but also start to build the mitigation strategy to protect it?
Exactly. That's the loop, what I'm saying, to go from the warning system to integrate it into the defensive measures, hopefully, more in real time. I mean, the ability to pick up a trend depends on how long the trend is. It could be several weeks, several days. I mean, the way trends work. So.
Yeah.
So that's the next stage that we're focused on for this year.
So Aubrey, it looks like this whole cybersecurity, cyber threat, are we doing a good job educating the mass? We are encouraging everybody to be such a tech savvy. We have become social media consumers. We have omni-channel retail. We have financial information in the cloud. Everything is in cloud.
Yes.
We have if any records now,
Yes.
and a physical evidence.
Yes.
My concern, and this might be geopolitical span, that I've been asked and actually have conversations with a bunch of leaders across the globe about potential attack on even GPS systems.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
So when we think from this context of our ecosystem, do you think we as a country are doing enough?
No, never. We can't do enough. Because the government only can do some parts, and the government does not control critical infrastructure. As you may or may not know from Y2K, for example, our electrical grid is not managed by one organization. We have the NERC that oversees everything, but there's not one group, there's not even one association that manages the grid. You may know that the grid is split up into different regional groups where there's ISOs, independent system operators, that control a number of different grid groups across the US. So we have balkanization of many different companies and industries, and the federal government does not and cannot control that. So we are very vulnerable because of this appropriate balkanization to have different parts of our critical infrastructure being taken out and taken down.
So for that matter, I mean, if I think about all the utilities, water, gas, you think about the metros, transport, aviation, everything is connected to the computer. Anything is connected to the computer is subject to cyber threat.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's no longer the physical and digital infrastructure. Physical infrastructure is connected. It's all connected.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah.
Well,
I think what you're saying is, for us as a vendor, the window of opportunity for us is not yet closed.
that's true.
You know, we've got a couple more moments there where there's still going to be
I think you have a
threats.
long window of opportunity
so.
in terms
I
of
think so.
in terms of the opportunity space, and I think it's dynamic, it's evolving,
Yes.
because as you build the mousetraps, the bad actors will find the new ways, and then so it's a cycle that has to continue,
Yes.
and you cannot say that, hey, I've done systems installed for defense systems and I'm done.
Yes.
No, it's got to be ongoing,
Exactly.
and it's going to be an infinite timeline.
And it's, you know, for those viewers that really focus on more the supply chain area, we talked about the board meeting the other day. It's very similar to elements of the supply chain. For example, in supply chain, you talk about resiliency, but often that's mentally logistical, resiliency, as opposed to relationship resiliency. So for example, there's a concept right now, we talked about this, where sometimes countries, US was maybe too closely coupled with China, and so now the current word is decoupling. But that may be too harsh a term. There may be gradients in a relationship of saying, instead of decoupling, loose coupling, and how supply chains in the future are going to have to dynamically adjust not just the routing, but their relationships in what I call some type of continuously recombinant supply chain that has grayness of how much do you decouple, and et cetera. So there are many parallels to the fragility of the critical infrastructure that you were alluding to in cybersecurity, many parallels with the complexity of the supply chain. Of course, you are the leader of the USC Global Supply Chain Institute. So what an honor to be brainstorming with you on these two different areas.
Aubrey, a pleasure is all mine, because you're such a visionary, and I think you think, I've found you through our friendship, that you have not only profound foresight, but also the wisdom to sort of ship through this complex subject and come up with very clear and precise narratives, and not only identifying the problem, but solving it. And so,
but the other thing, Nick, that we both talk about is that we might have a vision of future threats, but you have leadership and management that's more fixated on today. So for example, as we know, there's an addiction in terms of corporate America to quarterly earnings. And of course, more in your area, you'd say there was addiction to just-in-time. Just-in-time was a great concept a couple decades ago. So let's super optimize things so we can get there really quickly, get rid of warehouse costs and all these other things. And of course, what just-in-time process does, it makes us more brittle, makes us more fragile. So there's a degree of just-in-time addiction that's appropriate. So I would say in your area, what you're trying to do is similar to what I'm trying to do. You're trying to help out with supply chain resilience in spite of the cultural elements of the industry.
I agree completely.
It's really
absolutely.
parallel.
I think the book that you just I published, Supply Chain Network Design: How to Build Agile, Resilient, and Sustainable Supply Chain. I think over the last 4 decades, or even longer, if I may, after let's suppose Second World War, we taught, because of mass production and industrial revolution.
Right. Efficiency.
Efficiency.
Yeah.
Mass production, assembly operations.
Exactly.
How do I do cookie cutter?
Exactly.
Not one of a kind, but the cookie cutters.
Exactly.
And how do we improve the throughput?
Yes.
And reduce the cost. So
Yes.
speed to market, reduce the cost, improve the profitability, and losing the foresight of many of the angles that we talked about it.
And of course, one of the new ones is personalization. People don't want the same black car that Henry Ford wanted. They want customization of your car, and that goes against the grain of mass production.
Mass production, yeah. So I think that evolution somehow, and our addiction for the corporate profit and then subsequent reward for share price valuations and compensation associated for the executives had created generational leaders.
Yes.
And even educational institutions, that's all we taught is optimization in a very narrow focus.
Yes.
And we're saying, hey, there's multiple ways you can look at these things, and how do we sort of evolve our thinking, because guess what? The landscape has changed.
Wow.
The forces are brewing in a different directions. And so I think we're giving them why and how in the book by using use cases, and says, yes, you can chew the gum and walk at the same time.
Fantastic. Now, for people watching us today, if they want to learn more about this book, when did the book come out? What is the book?
Book is Supply Chain Network Design.
Who wrote
published myself, my colleague.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
And where can people buy the book?
It's actually on Amazon.
Great.
Called Supply Chain Network Design by Professor Das Gupta, Grace Soshik, and myself, Nick Vyas. I think it's a great read in a way to at least open up the mind and hearts to look at things differently and understand. I always have this say that sustainability for me is not for the planet Earth. It will heal in 100,000, 200,000 after we're gone. So how do you find the wisdom to do multiple things and stay ahead about all of these threats of cyber, environment, agility, adversarial relationships? Because we know the history teaches us one thing: the best and the greatest civilization has succumbed. And the best way to protect that from the history lessons is to protect your inputs, which is a supply chain and critical resources. If you don't protect those, you succumb to the civil war and ultimately the death of the civilization. And how quickly with the cybersecurity, we can bring down multiple utilities and all of those things. And imagine our lives without electricity. Dark ages, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the humanity will be at the loss because we are so used to flipping the switch and turn the light on, turn the faucet, water comes in.
Just my iPhone working.
Exactly. I mean, one can only imagine. And I think, and the sense of this podcast is not to scare everybody, but I think to educate and shed the light.
You didn't tell me that. So the nature of your book, I didn't realize. I thought your book was about logistical stuff. You're saying your book is a transformational book to open up minds to a different perspective. Am I right?
That's absolutely right. And my first chapter, I actually speak about 5,000 years of human history of exploration and chartering these things. So my hypothesis is that we're not intelligent beings because we just happen to have internet. We were intelligent all along the way. We have DNA of explorations, the curiosity, the learnings. It's in us.
Yes. Well, what you're saying, cybersecurity aside, and what we've talked about is the supply chain industry is so sophisticated and changing. It has its own inherent brittleness, again, away from cybersecurity. And I think what I hear you saying is that we need to read your transformational book to see where it should be going, because we could have a supply chain attack. And Elon Musk says we need to get ready to move, as a society to, what's the red one called? Mars. And so maybe we need to be thinking about what Musk is saying without cybersecurity, just because of supply chain disruption.
Absolutely.
Wow,
I mean, his talk,
that is
so
scary.
his foresight is even beyond the mean. We need to be multiplanetary species.
Yes.
But you think about the Red Sea crisis right now, that the Houthis are attacking on the Red Sea. That's 19% of the global trade, Aubrey. What I try to extrapolate and create a simulation of those what-if scenarios, and when you play those out, it's scary.
Nick, I don't want to get political, but the US had a plan, along with England and some other countries, that we're going to go in with the muscle of F-35s and blah, 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 and we're going to go after the Houthis. And we did. And 3 days later, they were attacking again. And we went in again, and they're attacking again and again. And they don't even have yet the nukes they hope to get from Iran. And here we are sitting with, $1 million shipping, 2-week delay in the global supply chain in the Red Sea. This is unbelievable.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think when you start to extrapolate the information we just talked today on this podcast, and is truly weave those into the meaningful impact on society,
yes,
businesses, individual communities, and families,
yes,
I think it almost comes back to the narratives of COVID disruption, but magnified by 10, if not 100 times.
I want to ask you, to what degree do you use ChatGPT and these type of tools? Are you using that much or not? Or?
So I encourage my students to use.
What about you?
I actually, you know what, I use, but I'm very cautious about it, because what it does is just regurgitates what you ask. So if you ask inaccurately, it will provide you, it's just the same thing. Data in, garbage out. If you ask the question that is less than clear, it will only provide you less than accurate information.
So can I share with you, you don't have to use
No.
it. Can I share with you, maybe 5 minutes or so, about what I've been learning about generative AI, whether it's ChatGPT or Meta AI or something else called Perplexity.ai. They're kind of the same. When I first started using this, I thought it was an advanced Google. You Google something, you get 10 articles, I have to read them, I have to synthesize, etc. Chat does that.
Yep.
Automatic. It's amazing.
Oh, absolutely.
Number 2, my wife likes learning French and Spanish. And in the past, she would use Google to translate some words, she'd write them down, etc. But Google cannot translate effectively idiomatic expressions, like the expression, someone kicked the bucket. You don't need that translated literally. Google does not have the knowledge to do that, but Chat does.
Chat does, absolutely.
Because it's not a word-for-word thing. So what I began to realize after a while playing around, it's all, just as you said, it's all about the questions. And I'm going to say something I think is kind of big. ChatGPT and these other type of tools really are like an expert consultant. This is a much bigger issue than Google on steroids. And let's say you want to find out about building a house, a car, a home, medical, whatever that is. You can have a dialogue. For example, in cybersecurity, when I first started, I asked it some questions for which I knew the answer, because I wanted to validate what its knowledge was. And I asked a question, and it told me the 3 things I knew about. But then it told me 2 things I didn't know about.
Yep.
I said, well, wait a minute. What is this one and what's that? And I started to learn. I started to go from more validation to learning and more and more and more. And that never ends. Now, I know that it's drawing only upon what are called these LLMs, these large language modules, about the stuff that's out there in the traditional press, papers and all this, which is massive. But I know in our little niche of what we're doing that we know things that are not in the press. Mm-hmm. So I know it's going to give me some deficient answers.
Yep.
And it's very humanistic. So it gives me these answers and I say, yes, but what about this and what about that? And they would say, well, thank you. That's a very good idea. I didn't know about that. It's empathetic, and it's not going to share my knowledge because of privacy with anything else. And so it's so fantastic to tune up articles and content. I know this is a little bit big, but there's so many people around the world that can speak and type English, if that's the mode that someone uses for chat. And if millions of people around the world realize that they can have an expert consultant that is expert not in 2 or 3 domains, but in dozens of domains, that means that we could have a civilizational upgrade. Now, I know there's errors, there's hallucinations, and there's bias, but those will get better. But this is quite profound of what it's going to do for our society. Even there's a lot of negatives.
I completely agree with you. I'll tell you, continuing on to the stream, I did the clinical research optimization project at the CAC Medical.
Really?
So it was a 2-year efficiency-driven project, and I was personally and emotionally invested into this project because my mother-in-law at a very young age passed with the cancer. So the real data point between the time the clinical researcher files for this clinical research study to the time the first patient gets enrolled is 310 days. So you think about that 310 days for the entire process to approve before you actually take the first patient and start the clinical research, 50 to 60% of your metastasized cancer patients are gone.
Wow.
Right? You lost that opportunity. So I'm like, so how do I find and streamline this and reduce this thing, right? So we, through the process optimizations and other things, we reduced that lead time down to about 128 days.
Amazing.
But still not good enough, right?
No.
It's still 4 months plus.
I know.
So we then looked at it, IBM, Watson Health.
Right.
And Watson Health was actually way before the ChatGPT, Regen GPT, was sort of an AI machine learning based sort of spearheading in the space of health. And when I saw the demo, because they would have given the lead time reduction down to 8 to 12 days. Clinical research, you say, Aubrey and Nick wants to do research about this particular cell and degradation of DNA molecule or whatever. And then we can actually look at the entire repository of eligible patients, communications, connections, boom, boom, and all of a sudden the lead times are reduced to 8 days. And then I looked at, wow, what is the IBM Watson Health has? Well, it ingests 10,000 to about 1 million articles a day, which humans, we can will never be able to do.
Never.
Right? It ingests this information, creates a repository, takes all the advanced research, continuing publications, feeds it itself, and then just provides you the expert advice, the consultancy, right? And suddenly, we didn't do the phase at the CAC, but I'm like, that is truly a great opportunity. So I am, as you know, I'm a biggest subscriber of using technology to advance our human civilization. I think there's so much potential, and we have to understand that we have a limitation of how much we can ingest, the fatigue factor, the physical factor, the health factor.
I know.
We have to deal with this while this advanced computing machines can actually 24/7 provide us the help that we need, what I call the augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence.
It's so true, whether IT people in a company are overloaded about cybersecurity or general practitioners are overloaded by the changing threats and all the knowledge, we need automation and AI to improve this. I talked to someone that's an executive with RadNet, that's a large billion-dollar medical imaging company, and he told me that they've been using AI more and more. So if you have some type of radiological scan, you don't need necessarily a doctor to look at it because AI now has the experience to do a better analysis and to be able to analyze diseases further, more in the future than they could.
Agree. This is such a fantastic, Aubrey.
Thank you.
I know you and I can talk about this for hours, but you taking time, being here, sharing your knowledge and wisdom in areas of cybersecurity is so greatly appreciated, and I continue to thank you for being on my board, being my friend, and supporting all the things we do at the center.
Always a pleasure talking to the master of supply chain.
Well, thank you, Aubrey.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed another exciting episode of Supply Chain Demystified. Stay tuned for the next demystifying discussion on the supply chain. Visit uscsupplychain.com to stay up to date on all things supply chain.